The girl who didn't make it home. By the time the fisherman finds me, I will have been dead for 33 hours, 6 minutes, and 29 seconds. 18 hours since the police declared me missing. 15 hours since Mia told my chemistry teacher that my tent was empty, that I hadn't returned from the party we'd snuck out to the night before. Careful, quiet, every branch a potential witness. It was thrilling, our hearts racing, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in the air, the moon a sharp crescent hanging above us like a blade. Mia clutched my hand, her grip tight and sweaty, and didn't let go until we'd slipped past the tents and joined the others by the lake. The music from someone's phone was turned low, just enough to hear the muffled beats of a song I couldn't quite place. One of the guys offered us a beer, the cans chilled in the dark, murky water. I remember staring at the lake, unable to tell where the water ended and the trees began. The first article in the local paper reads, "Bright high school student vanishes after late-night lake gathering." Soon after, the search begins. The water rescue team and fire department take charge, their boats cutting through the still surface of the lake. Dogs patrol the woods, their noses pressed to the ground, sniffing for traces of me. A human chain forms, people moving slowly through the trees, their eyes scanning for anything out of place. A helicopter buzzes overhead, its blades slicing through the heavy, humid air. The search drags on for hours, stretching into dusk, but the woods give up nothing. The police start asking questions. When was she last seen? What was she wearing? Had she been drinking? Did she seem upset, depressed, suicidal? No, and no. She was laughing, she was dancing, she seemed fine. When the fisherman finds my body, miles downstream from where I was last seen, the truth settles in. The autopsy shows a bruise on my temple and faint marks behind my ears. The coroners examine the water in my lungs and confirm I was alive when I entered the water. I died by drowning. My classmates are questioned again. Mia says she left early, while I stayed behind with her older brother Ethan, who's had a crush on me since freshman year. Ethan's behavior strikes the police as off. He claims he barely spoke to me, even though people saw us leave the party together for a few minutes. When my clothes are examined, traces of Ethan's skin are found caught in the fabric. Still, Ethan sticks to his story, maybe because the truth would humiliate him. Or maybe he's just afraid of what the questions might uncover. Ethan's not entirely wrong, though. We only exchanged a handful of words that night, but only because his mouth was otherwise occupied. I'd enjoyed every second of it, and looking back, I wish I'd given him a real chance, but I was too worried about what people might think. So, like always, I brushed him off, leaving him to walk away from the party feeling rejected. Lila insists she heard Mia and me arguing that night, just before Mia headed back to the campsite. According to her, we were fighting over Ethan. Of course she'd say that. What else would two girls argue about if not a boy? Lila even claims that Mia pushed me, though Mia denies it vehemently. She denies discussing Ethan at all, insisting it was about something else, something that wouldn't come to light until much later, when our chemistry teacher became a suspect. But Lila holds firm to her version. The thing about Lila is that she's always been invisible, the kind of girl whose name teachers stumble over even after months of class. Sarah, Sophie, Stella, something with Ons, right? So, when she finally gets the chance to talk to the police and be part of the investigation, she seizes it. Unfortunately, Lila isn't much help to the investigators. She leaves the party at 2 a.m., just 40 minutes before I die, leaving me alone with a group of guys who've brought along some relaxants. Sitting next to them felt like being trapped in a surreal dream where Friedrich Nietzsche explains string theory at a kegger. At some point, I decided it was time to head back, One of the guys casually asked if I needed someone to walk with me, and I said yes, but no one moved. I glanced back, the campsite faintly visible through the cold, pale light filtering through the trees. It was only a short walk, a path I'd taken countless times during the trip. I'd never felt threatened by the shadows or the rustling leaves before, but that night the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. Still, I refused to be that girl, the one who got spooked by every sound in the dark, the one who needed an escort for a few steps. So I stood up and said I'd go alone. Instead of sticking to the dark trail, though, I decided to take a small detour along the riverbank. A bit longer, a bit brighter, and hopefully a bit safer. One of the guys told me to text him when I made it to my tent, but when I didn't, no one even noticed. 16 days after my death, suspicion begins to shift toward our chemistry teacher. Ryan, one of my classmates, reveals that he'd felt sick that night and went looking for the teacher's tent, only to find it empty. Soon after, the teacher's behavior takes a strange turn. He starts making inconsistent statements that don't add up. One day, he calls me into his office after class, where he insists that his earlier suggestion to her before the trip had been nothing but a joke. She understood that, right? It was sarcasm, he says, claiming that what he really meant was that if she wanted to improve her grades, she should consider signing up for a study group. And this is where Lila steps in for the final time. She confesses that she visited our chemistry teacher after the party and that they went to the boathouse, where, according to her, nothing bad happened. He was just there for me. The chemistry teacher is immediately suspended, but the case against him has nothing to do with mine, as Lila's alibi clears him. Meanwhile, the suspicions surrounding Mia and Ethan are too weak to pursue. My case remains unsolved, and eventually, people begin to accept the idea that it was just a tragic accident, that I must have hit my head when I slipped into the water. They agree that I seemed unhappy, not just that night, but in general, and that my relationship with my parents, who expected perfection in everything, was strained. Perhaps the pressure had finally gotten to me. It's all unsatisfying, of course. Unsatisfying for the local news outlet, whose updates eventually taper off, replaced by stories about city council meetings and bake sales. Unsatisfying for the police, left with yet another unsolved case gathering dust in a filing cabinet. A puzzle with too many missing pieces. Unsatisfying for my parents, who, years later, will sit in a dimly lit room for an interview and say, their voices trembling, that not a day goes by without them thinking of their daughter. My mother will clutch a tissue, her eyes red-rimmed, and say, she was so full of life. She had so much ahead of her. My father will stare at the floor, his jaw tight, and add, we just want answers. We deserve to know what happened. But the answers never come. Maybe one day, a classmate will write a college essay about my case, reflecting on how it taught them that life can end in an instant. They'll describe the shock of losing someone they knew, the way it made them question their own mortality. They'll talk about how it felt to sit in class the day after the news broke, the empty desk beside them a stark reminder of how fragile everything is. Or maybe my story will end up on a true crime podcast, dissected by hosts with soothing voices and a knack for dramatic pauses. They'll speculate about what might have happened that night, weaving theories out of thin air. They'll interview people who barely knew me, giving them a platform to share half-remembered details and second-hand gossip. Listeners will tune in during their morning commutes, shaking their heads and saying, "How awful," before moving on with their day. Perhaps a streaming service will stretch my story into a tightly structured 8-episode miniseries, where my body is discovered in the opening scene. Just enough time for viewers to decide if they'll keep watching. They'll cast a rising star to play me, someone with wide eyes and a shy smile, someone who looks just enough like me to make it eerie. The show will dramatize every detail, inventing scenes and dialogue to fill the gaps. They'll give my parents a heart-wrenching monologue, my friends a tearful confrontation, and my teacher a sinister backstory. By the final episode, they'll hint at a resolution without ever providing one, leaving viewers to debate what really happened. Or maybe none of this happens. Maybe my story fades away like countless others. Maybe I become just another name on a list, another statistic, another girl who didn't make it home. Maybe the world moves on, as it always does, and I'm left to drift in the collective memory of those who knew me, a ghost haunting the edges of their thoughts. It doesn't matter who profits from my story. It doesn't even matter if they eventually find the two men I crossed paths with on my way back to the campsite, in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of this matters because in the end I'm just another girl who didn't make it home. The truth is, I don't know if anyone will ever really understand what happened that night. The woods keep their secrets, and the lake holds its silence. The people who were there, Mia, Ethan, Lila, the guys with their beers and their careless laughter, they'll carry pieces of that night with them for the rest of their lives. But those pieces don't fit together neatly. They're fragments, sharp and jagged, and no matter how hard anyone tries, they'll never form a complete picture. Mia will grow up, go to college, start a career. She'll marry someone kind and have children of her own. But sometimes, late at night, she'll lie awake and wonder if she could have done something differently. She'll remember the feel of my hand in hers as we snuck through the trees, the way I laughed when we reached the lake. She'll wonder if she should have stayed, if she should have dragged me back to the tent, if she should have seen the danger lurking in the shadows. Ethan will move away, change his name, start over somewhere new. He'll tell people he doesn't keep in touch with anyone from high school, that it's a chapter of his life he'd rather forget. But every now and then he'll catch a glimpse of someone who looks like me, a girl with my hair, my smile, my laugh, and he'll freeze, his heart pounding in his chest. He'll remember the way I brushed him off that night, the hurt in his eyes, the way he walked away. He'll wonder if things might have been different if he'd just stayed, if he'd been braver, if he'd fought for me. Lila will fade into the background, as she always has. She'll finish school, get a job, live a quiet life. But every time she hears my name, every time she sees a news story about a missing girl, she'll feel a pang of guilt. She'll remember the way she lied to the police, the way she twisted the truth to make herself seem important. She'll wonder if she could have done more, if she could have told the whole story, if she could have changed the outcome. The guys from the party will scatter, their lives taking them in different directions. They'll grow up, settle down, forget about that night. But sometimes, when they're alone, they'll think about me. They'll remember the way I stood up to leave, the way I hesitated, the way I said I'd be fine. They'll wonder why they didn't walk me back, why they didn't insist, why they didn't care enough to make sure I got home safely. And then there's my chemistry teacher. He'll lose his job, his reputation, his sense of self. He'll spend the rest of his life trying to rebuild, trying to prove that he's not the monster people think he is. But no matter what he does, no matter where he goes, he'll always feel the weight of suspicion, the shadow of doubt. He'll wonder if he could have done something differently, if he could have been a better teacher, a better person, if he could have prevented what happened. As for me, I'm still here, in a way. I'm in the whispers of the trees, the ripples on the lake, the cold, damp earth that cradled my body. I'm in the memories of those who knew me, the stories they tell, the questions they ask. I'm in the ache of my parents' hearts, the tears they shed, the prayers they whisper. But I'm also gone. I'm the empty seat in the classroom, the unfinished homework, the yearbook photo with a date beneath it. I'm the girl who didn't come home, the girl who didn't get to grow up, the girl who didn't get to live. And maybe that's the hardest part. Not the how or the why or the who, but the what if. What if I'd stayed at the campsite? What if I'd taken a different path? What if I'd said yes to Ethan or no to the beer, or waited for someone to walk me back? What if, what if, what if? But there are no answers, only questions. And in the end, I'm just another girl who didn't make it home. The end. Vocabulary and context. As you read this story, you'll encounter words and phrases that might feel a bit challenging at first, but each one adds depth and emotion to the narrative. Let's break them down together to help you see the story more clearly. The story begins with a striking line. By the time the fisherman finds me, I will have been dead for 33 hours. Here, the future perfect tense, will have been dead, is used to show that the narrator's death is certain and will be completed by a specific time in the future. This creates a sense of inevitability and sets the tone for the story. When the narrator describes the night of the party, she uses vivid imagery like the moon, a perfectly curved sickle. A sickle is a farming tool with a curved blade, often associated with the shape of a crescent moon. This comparison paints a picture of a sharp, eerie glow in the sky, adding to the mysterious and unsettling mood of the scene. As the story unfolds, you'll come across words like hematoma, a large bruise caused by bleeding under the skin, and scrutiny, close examination or criticism. These terms are important because they help explain the circumstances of the narrator's death and the investigation that follows. For example, the hematoma on her head suggests she was injured before drowning, while the scrutiny faced by her classmates shows how the police closely examined their actions and statements. The narrator also reflects on how her parents expected her to excel, to do extremely well in everything, which created strain, pressure, or tension in her life. This pressure is something many people can relate to, but in her case, it adds a layer of tragedy to her story. When the narrator says she brushed him off, it means she ignored or dismissed someone, often in a casual or unkind way. This small moment becomes significant later in the story, showing how even minor actions can have lasting consequences. Similarly, when she describes the guys at the party as having brought tranquilizers, she's referring to drugs meant to calm or sedate someone, which adds to the unsettling atmosphere of the night. The story also uses metaphors and figurative language to create mood and meaning. For example, phrases like, "the woods keep their secrets," or "I'm just another dead girl underwater," aren't meant to be taken literally. Instead, they evoke feelings of isolation, injustice, and the idea that some truths may never be uncovered. As you read, you'll notice how the narrator's voice shifts between reflection and raw emotion. Words like exhilarating, thrilling, or exciting, lurking, waiting hidden, and charged, filled with tension, help paint a vivid picture of the night she disappeared. Meanwhile, terms like vehemently, strongly, or passionately, and inconsistent, not staying the same, describe the behavior of the characters involved in the investigation, adding layers of complexity to their actions. By the end of the story, you'll have encountered a rich tapestry of vocabulary and expressions that bring the narrative to life. Words like fade, to disappear gradually, unsatisfying, not fulfilling, and inevitable, unavoidable, tie together the themes of loss, mystery, and the search for truth. Take your time with the story, and don't hesitate to revisit this section if you need clarification. By understanding these words and phrases, you'll not only improve your English skills but also gain a deeper appreciation for the emotional and thematic layers of the story.